recording, and there we go. So I'm just going to fill a little bit of airtime while everybody's getting settled in. Hi, Abby. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
We're coming. We have, I think, all the time zones covered today. We've got West Coast, East Coast, and England. So Greenwich time. So we've got everything and everything in between. So. So we're going to be, like I said, you know, I hit the record button. We're going to be recording this. So if you have to step out for a little bit, no worries. We will have it on our YouTube channel. I'll be blasting it out to our Facebook page too. So you can come back and pick up if you need to, and I'll make this note in the comments too. If you've joined us late, it'll be there for you to catch up with too. So a couple ways for you to participate today is you can make some comments in the chat section, but if you have a question for Lisa, please put that in the Q&A and we'll bring that in. Lisa and Abby are going to talk for about 35-40 minutes, and then I'll pop in with those questions. So with that, let's get the day going. Lisa, we chatted in the green room a little bit about this particular book, but I didn't tell you exactly what a huge fan I am of yours. So
Thank you.
I thought I would save that for the recording.
Yeah. Otherwise you'd have to say it twice.
Exactly. It wouldn't have come across as authentic as it. But Warwick's is located in San Diego, La Jolla, California. We have been in business since 1896. We've been in La Jolla since the 30s and the building route since the 50s. I've been the director of events for about 10 years there. And we host about 150 events a year. And so I don't really have a lot of extra time to do other events. But in the before, I like to call before the pandemic, in the before, you had an event in San Diego. And I actually snuck away. Don't tell the author that I did this. I snuck away from one of our events to go to your event.
That's so naughty.
So
naughty.
I know, right?
Naughty, but I like it.
So, it was for the family upstairs. Loved that book, but yeah, don't. And I would never do that if you came to our store.
Okay. Oh, I love it.
So anyways, I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and so I read so many of your books and just adore them. But anyways,
thank you.
So, but thank you, and thank you to Atria and to Ariel for allowing us to host you today, because like I said, I'm a huge fan. So thank you to Atria. Appreciate having this event. So with that, I'm sure everybody that's here already knows about Lisa, but I'm going to do my due diligence and do my intro here. So Lisa Jewell is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 18 novels, including The Family Upstairs, which I went to. And Then She Was Gone, as well as Watching You and I Found You. And I was kind of lucky and got to be on one of the pre-pub things for this with Ariel. And I was the one in the meeting that said my favorite book was The House We Grew Up In. And
oh, yeah.
I love that book. So
yes, I like that one too.
always have to mention that. Her novels have sold more than 4.5 million copies internationally, and her work has also been translated into 25 languages. Lisa lives in London with her husband and their 2 daughters. And then Abby's going to be chatting with her today, and you are Crime by the Book blogger. She's been a crime fiction fan ever since discovering her mother's childhood collection of Nancy Drew books hiding in a dusty box in the attic. She explores crime fiction from around the world on her website, crimebythebook.com. She shares her reviews with fans on Instagram at Crime by the Book. I love this. Now a 20-something working in publishing, she lives in New York with a vast pile of books. I got my vast pile too, Abby. So you two have a great conversation, and we'll see you in about 35 minutes or so.
Thank you, Julie. See you.
Well,
hi,
Lisa, hi. It's so nice to see you again.
Oh, it's so nice to see you as well. It's always such a treat.
I know. I feel so lucky. This is the second time I've gotten to chat with you this year virtually. So silver linings to everything we're going through at the moment. But how are you? How's everything?
Yeah, I think it's a really weird question asking people that at the moment, isn't it? Because normally you say, how are you? And the other person goes, I'm fine. But
I
at
know.
the moment, there's a sort of gap, isn't there? And people go, well, yeah, you know. It's a really hard question to answer. Really hard question to answer. Yes.
Well, we can get to easier stuff to discuss. We have an amazing new book from you to talk about today. But before we get into the book, I would love to chat just quickly about your background, because I learned this year that you had a whole career writing contemporary fiction before you transitioned into crime and suspense novels. And I'd love to hear from you. I mean, how did that transition come to be, and what made you kind of gravitate towards the suspense genre?
Yeah, well, so I started writing my first novel in 1996 when I was, how old does that make me, 27 or something? So clearly probably around the same age as you, I don't know. A very young person, in other words. And even when I wrote that first novel, which turned out to be, obviously I started writing it without knowing what I was going to be writing, as is the case with all my books, and it ended up being this really lovely romantic comedy. But even back then, I always had a taste for dark literature, dark everything, actually. I've always had an interest in the dark side of humanity, and the depths to which some people plunge, and all that stuff. But I ended up writing this really lovely feel-good romantic comedy, and it did really, really, really well in the UK. It was a huge bestseller, and so therefore, obviously, I was going to write another book, and it would be the same. And just sort of, I just felt my way really, really gradually from writing those very feel good, upbeat romances into writing these sort of darker family dramas, like The House We Grew Up In, that Julie just mentioned. And it was it was almost like I was experimenting a bit with each book, like to see how much more dark stuff I could put in it and how much less relationship stuff I could put in it. And then at some point I just kind of flipped over completely. I killed a character in The Third Wife, and that was it really. And I kind of put that out into the world, The Third Wife, and I didn't know how people were going to respond to it. I didn't know how my agent, my editor, my readers, booksellers, I didn't know how people were going to relate to it. And everybody just said, oh, that's fine. Yes, we can handle this. You can carry on killing people. So yes, it's been so gradual that I've barely kind of been aware of the fact that I've been doing it. But here I am, and I can look back on the transition, and it's clearly quite dramatic.
yeah, totally. And I think a lot of us can say we're so glad that you did kind of make that transition. I see someone in the chat here saying, to be honest, I'm glad you went to write the dark stuff, and I totally agree.
Can I just say hello to, this is Nazanin, who's one of my my fans on Instagram, who's always so chatty and so enthusiastic, and I see her name popping up. Hello. Her name pops up at all these events. I never have a chance to say hello to her.
That is so wonderful.
Nazanin. Thank you for coming again. Hi. Maybe I'll be
thank you
one day.
That is so wonderful, and I love that social media lets us actually connect like that, even when we're all so far apart. I love that. Well, Lisa, we have to get into Invisible Girl, and we will obviously be keeping this totally spoiler-free, because I know there are probably folks who haven't had a chance to read it yet. But to kick us off here, could you just share in your own words, what is Invisible Girl about?
Right. Okay. I have not found a way over all of these events of explaining what this book is about in a really nice, neat nutshell. This has not happened. So bear with me as I ramble on endlessly about what this book is about. I have to hold it to talk about what it's about for some reason. It makes it easier. So it's about three people essentially, and I'll introduce you to the characters because the story comes from the characters. So it's best if I start with them. The character who was my initial inspiration for writing the book is a guy called Owen Pick, and Owen Pick is 33 years old. He's a bit of a loner. He's a bit strange. He lives with his aunt in her spare bedroom. His aunt isn't very nurturing, let's put it like that. She doesn't really like him very much, and she's not very nice to him. So he has this really weird, lonely, sad, uncomfortable existence. And at the beginning of the book, he has just been suspended from his job as a college lecturer because two of his students have reported him for sexual misconduct, an accusation that he strongly refutes. So he's kind of at a low ebb when we first meet him. And he's quite bitter and cross and angry about everything. And Owen's house, so Owen lives in his aunt's apartment in this huge house in this very grand street in Hampstead in North London, which is a real area of North London, which is very beautiful. And in the house opposite Owen's house is a family called the Fors family, who is Kate, who's a physiotherapist, Rowan, her husband, who's a child psychologist, and they've got 2 teenage children called Georgia and Joshua. And at the beginning of the book, Georgia is walking home from the tube station one night in the dark and feels that she's being followed by a man, and comes rushing into the house telling her mum, I think this man just followed me back from the tube station. And lo and behold, it is poor Owen Pick from across the street. So at that point, Kate has her suspicions about Owen and kind of has her eye on him. Then the third character is my invisible girl, the invisible girl herself, who is a teenager. She's 17 years old and she's called Sapphire Maddox. And she's a former patient of Rowan's. So she was treated by Rowan from the ages of 12 to 15 for, she had something horrible happen to her when she was a child, and she was self-harming. So she was sent for therapy, and Rowan was her therapist. And then he finished their therapy because he thought he'd cured her. She does not agree that her treatment with Rowan should have finished when it did, and she takes to following Rowan around a bit in a slightly stalkerish manner, but she mainly follows him around in the dark, which is why she's called Invisible Girl. So the story really takes off. So that's the scene setting of the characters. The story really takes off when Sapphire goes missing on Valentine's night from outside Rowan's house. And the last person to see her alive is Owen Pick. So that's the setup for the book.
It's
sorry,
it's
it's
good. No, it's such a great setup, and I have so many questions for you about these characters. But before we get to that, can you identify a moment that sparked the inspiration for this story?
Oh yes, absolutely, and there always is for me. There's always a thing, like a little light bulb thing, and I know when it arrives, I know it's arrived. It's not like I get loads and loads of ideas and I have to sift through them to find one that I think is a big enough idea to write a novel about. It's literally one. It's one,
so
and it
wild.
comes.
Yeah.
It comes, and then I go, oh, you're here. You've arrived.
That is wild. What happens if one doesn't arrive? Can you like?
That's in fact that only happened once. When I finished one book and went to, I thought, right, okay, I better start writing the next one. And still, when I was on the day that I knew I should be starting my new novel, I still didn't have an idea, and that's never ever happened to me before. I just kept assuming it would arrive, that my magic idea would arrive, and it didn't. So what I actually did was I just thought, look, there's no point staring at a keyboard when there's nothing in my head to write about. So I just walked around the streets of London. I just left the house every day and kept walking, and that was I was walking one day and I looked up at a window, and it was you could tell it was a window of a hoarder, because there was just stuff right up to the top of the window frame. The curtains clearly hadn't been opened in years, and I just suddenly thought to myself, oh God, what must it be like to live with a hoarder? And there it was. I was like, that's what I want to write about. So that was the house we grew up in.
Wow.
So I had to go hunting for my idea for that one. It didn't just drop out the sky. But for Invisible Girl, it did just drop out the sky. I was walking quite close to Hampstead, by the way, just over the way, and it was snowing, and it was the end of the school day, and there were loads of little school kids running around throwing snowballs at each other, and through the snow and through all these school children, this man appeared, and there was something about there was just something about him that I found really arresting. He just looked so ground down and disappointed and bitter, and he looked like the kind of guy who tried his hardest all the time and never ever fitted in and never did anything right and never got what he wanted. And I just thought I'd love to write about a guy like that, a bit creepy and a bit and that was Owen. So it all started with him. So I set him up first. I set him up and I got him, so I put him in this situation where he lost his job. And then I thought, okay, now what happens? I've got Owen, he's living in his aunt's house. He's really unhappy. He's just lost his job. And then I thought, I need someone to see Owen and to respond to Owen's weirdness, and to have, because we're inside Owen's head and we know how he's feeling and what he really is. But I needed the reader to also see how he appears to other people. So that's where Kate came from. So then Kate comes onto the page, and she inhabits the counterpoint, I suppose, to Owen. And actually the book was originally just going to be about the two of them. In the area where they live, there's a load of sex attacks happening. So the book was going to be about her suspicions about her neighbour across the street, and injustices, and him being falsely accused. And I wasn't quite sure where I was going with it, but that was a dynamic I wanted to explore. The guy who's perceived as being a weirdo from both sides of the equation. And then, yes, Sapphire turned up quite late in the day. She was a late arrival at the party. I happened to mention her in passing when discussing one of Rowan's old patients. And I wrote her name down on the page just as she wasn't supposed to be there.
Wow, yeah.
But then I just typed the name Sapphire Maddox, and I sort of alluded vaguely to the fact that she'd been treated by Rowan because she'd been self-harming, and that she'd had something horrible happen to her as a child. And I immediately just realized that she needed to be a part of this story too. So there she was on the page, and then I just went straight into introducing her into the story.
I loved how the story is so much about the way these characters' lives intersect. And I was so curious, when you're a writer who's tackling characters, I mean, they're all coming from such different perspectives and ages and walks of life. I mean, what is that experience like when you're kind of working so intimately with characters from such different backgrounds?
Oh, it's thrilling. Oh, I mean, it's wonderful. It's like, I can't imagine when I read a book that's all written from the same point of view, maybe in the first person or the third person. I can't imagine how a writer managed to do that, how they managed to write a whole story, but only allow the reader to see it from one person's point of view, because I like to walk around a story and look at it from all the different perspectives. And I sometimes feel like I'm cheating in a way, because I use so many different points of view. I think it's much more challenging when you're keeping a reader engaged with a story in which the writer knows things that the reader doesn't know, and you're revealing things and the story's developing, when there's only one person seeing the story. So for me, it just is much, much easier. And then obviously if I'm in a position where I can introduce lots of characters, points of view into the story, it's clearly going to be clearer who each character is if they're obviously diverse. But it's also much more fun to write. It's so much fun to have three highly contrasting people peopling the same story. It's just because then you're really excited to get back to. So I write a Kate chapter, who's a middle class mum of teenagers like myself, so that's fun and interesting, just to sort of reflect some of my own experiences of being a middle-class, middle-aged mother of teenagers into a character, and then to switch and be 33-year-old virgin. Did I mention he was a virgin?
I don't think you mentioned that yet, but yes, he is.
I think that's very pertinent and important fact.
Yeah, it is, definitely.
And then to flick again and be Sapphire, be a 17-year-old girl who's suffering from claustrophobia and can't sleep in her own bed. And so to me, it's a gift to be able to do that.
I love it. I mean, it's something I love about your writing. Every book of yours that I've read, you do such a great job inhabiting these characters and bringing them to life for readers. And I feel like in this story, I mean, like you said, just the wild differences between these characters it's so entertaining, and I just loved it. And I think we really have to take a moment to talk about Owen, because he's the character that infuriated me the most in this book, also fascinated me the most. And obviously I'm going to keep this all spoiler free, but is, as you said, a man who has fallen on some very hard times, and he finds himself drawn into the incel community online. Could you explain to folks who might not know what this is, what exactly this is?
Yes. Did you know what it was?
I did know what it was.
Yes. And I assumed that everybody knew. I had no idea that it's actually quite a niche piece of knowledge, cultural knowledge to be in possession of. So yes, I'm very happy to explain. It's pretty unsavory stuff, but yeah. So incel is short for involuntary celibate, and involuntary celibates, incels, is a community of men who exist online. I'm sure they're real, but they commune online in online forums, and to discuss the fact that women don't want to have sex with them. Basically, that's the bottom line. And there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of rage, and there's a lot of misogyny, and there's a lot of very violent discussions, which is probably not suitable to be talking about at lunchtime on a Saturday. But yes, and it's an ideology. There's the ideology is that society is responsible for the fact that women won't sleep with them, and society should be doing something to rectify this situation. And Owen, lovely Owen, and this was kind of something I hadn't planned to do until it happened, but I thought it'd be really interesting, given that I'd created him specifically to see how he might respond to really more and more bad things happening to him. I thought it'd be really interesting if he found himself purely by accident in an incel forum. And so I created this character called Bryn, who's a major player in the forum that Owen finds himself in, and tries to radicalize Owen and get him to do something quite unspeakable, which you will find out when you read the book. So it was just a perfect, it was just a really good way of pushing Owen and seeing what he was capable of for me as a writer, because in terms of his character development.
Definitely.
So I think hopefully I don't think I went too deep into it, because I didn't want to write a book about the incel world. That wasn't what the intention was. I just wanted to skirt around it and look at it and put him in it, but not actually explore it in any depth. So
and I think the way you have definitely, and I think the way you have Owen relate to it, I think it says more about his psychology than it does about actually the incel forum that he finds, because it's really about how he relates to women in his life, and how just how he's kind of wired and how life has shaped him in a certain way, and I thought his character development was just outstanding. And before, I know I don't want to get too far into the incel thing, but I was really curious. I mean, what kind of research was involved in familiarizing yourself? Because it is like pretty horrific and shocking.
Yes. And I don't, for readers who don't like the sound of it, it does not go too far.
No.
It really doesn't.
No.
There are allusions to the sorts of things that men talk about on these forums rather than specifics. No, I didn't do any research, because I already knew everything that I needed to know in order to go as far as I wanted to go with that particular storyline. I've read, there's a very famous article a couple of years ago that you've probably read, called The Rage of the Incels. Did you read that?
Oh yeah, I did read that. Yeah.
Tolentino, so she did research. She actually spent time on incel forums and read these horrific conversations that take place in these forums, and then wrote an article about it. So I didn't have to get my hands dirty there. I just read her article, which is quite shocking. And if you are interested in it and you've got a strong stomach for it, it's definitely worth a read, The Rage of the Incels. And there was also a documentary on Netflix about a year ago as well. I watched. I'd seen it there on the list for ages, and then I thought, I should probably watch this since I'm about to start writing about it. So I watched that just before I started writing it. And then there's the technical stuff that I just got off Wikipedia, because like in all online communities, there ends up being a shorthand language and slang and what have you, terminology that is born out of these forums. So I went onto the Wikipedia page to find out what sort of terminology they were using on these forums. That's it really. So not too much in the way of research. I'd already done most of it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like you said, it's not actually the driving like
Yes.
topic of this book, you know, and I think something that I loved about the story so much, and you can tell me if this is like a total misread of the book, but I'm so interested in the way you explore how men are like relating to the women in their lives. You know, you definitely did that through Owen, but then the character of Rowan, who is Kate's husband, was also
Yeah.
really interesting to me. And he's a guy who has his own kind of toxic masculinity, you know, running through his character, I felt. And I wondered if you could just speak a bit to just the what interested you in exploring these different relationships in this story?
I mean, that's the thing with Rowan. He never does anything bad. But when you're reading him, you are so on the defense for Kate because he's doing these little microaggressions, these tiny little things, and he's doing them. And the reason why he can do them is because, and this is quite early on in the book, so it's not a spoiler, the year prior to the book starting, Kate had been so convinced that he was having an affair that she went through all his private affairs, including his patient's personal records. And he found out that she'd done this, and he stuck his flag in the top of the moral high ground. And that's where we meet them. She's small. She did the bad thing. She was in the wrong. He has won the battle for the moral high ground, which exists in pretty much every marriage. It's just there in one form or another. So he is able to keep committing these little microaggressions that if it happened to me, if my husband did these things to me, I'd be right in his face and say, what are you doing? Why are you 40 minutes late? You said you'd be home at 8 o'clock and you've just walked in at 8:40 and you expect me to accept that and not be annoyed about that. I would do that, but Kate can't do that because she's so scared. So that was a really interesting thing because this could be a rash generalization, but I do think in marriages, particularly with children, it is normally the woman who has the moral high ground. So that was an interesting subversion to write about. And yeah, so that, and he is toxic. He is a toxic man, and his son sees it as well. His son Joshua says to a character who I shouldn't name at this point because it would be a spoiler, I can't believe that it's my dad's job to mess around inside children's heads when he can't even treat the people he lives with properly. So yeah, so, and then so then there's Bryn and Owen, who are clearly, you know, having issues with their own masculinity, which has got very warped somewhere along the line. But no, I didn't go into the book thinking I would like to explore the themes of toxic masculinity. That isn't what I set out to write about. But once it's there and it's on the page and you realize that's what you're dealing with, you just get your teeth into it and just go for it, because it's just, you know, it's such rich territory to write about the way obviously it could be anybody, and that's what that's the beauty of the thriller genre is you're not there to explore what really happens in society. You're not there to reflect society. You're there to confound the reader's expectations and just to do unexpected things and to find the bad people in the places that people aren't looking. So actually, I think within the thriller genre, you'll find a lot more villains who are women, because it's the unexpected thing. It's the thing that the reader wasn't looking. They weren't looking at the woman in the corner over there. They were looking at the guy bullying his wife over there. And anyway, so it's a complicated area, but it's fun to write about. But particularly with Rowan and Kate, I really enjoyed that very brittle dynamic between the two of them.
Yeah, and
nobody ever raises their voice, you know. It's just
so subtle but so tense, and you feel it, and you really do want to defend Kate right from the get-go, because you feel that power dynamic. And you know, it's funny because it's like we're talking about toxic masculinity, but really every single character in this book has some sort of something going on where you begin to get a little bit suspicious of them. And certainly over the course of the reading experience, so much is revealed about all these people. And I'm curious, I mean, when you begin writing, when these characters first come to you, how much do you know about them from the beginning of your writing process? And are there things that surprise you, you know, as the author while you're writing these characters?
Yeah, no, I occasionally write a character who I know cannot in any way ever be, I can't put any ambiguity into that character because they don't need it. So in The Family Upstairs, for example, Libby, who inherits the mansion.
Yeah.
She's come from outside of the story and finds herself in the story after the event. And her role in that story was to find out what had happened to her family when she was a baby. So there was never a chance that Libby was going to be harboring some dark secret, or there was going to be a massive twist that the reader didn't see coming about her. But more often than not, I like to leave my characters really fluid and really open, because it makes it easier to write a thriller if you're leaving it, particularly because I don't know what's going to happen at the end. So once I get towards the end of writing a novel, from my point of view, it's so much easier if I can look back and think, okay, I've left everybody open. I've left all their motives open. I've put enough, red flags around the place that the reader will be imagining it could be anyone. So now I've got this rich pickings to decide who the person should be. So it makes it much more fun. But it's also just that's what people are like as well.
Definitely.
You just have to pick up a newspaper and read stories about, husbands beating their wives to death and mothers drowning their children, and everybody said, oh, they seem like such a nice guy. He was such a lovely family man. And, so this is what people are like. People are capable of all sorts of things given the right circumstances. So,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And so something that really interested me about this story, and this might be a hard question to answer because I know the story kind of flows pretty intuitively for you, but this book is a story about a missing girl. And I was kind of surprised that, the missing persons element, it takes a backseat to a lot of the interpersonal stuff that's playing out. And I guess I'm wondering if you could share with us at all, like, why was that the way you wanted to structure it, or why not make it a story about, detectives just searching for Sapphire? Why spend all this time?
That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about that, but I suppose it does go back to what I was saying before about how it originally had been a story about Kate and Owen as diametrically opposed characters who live physically opposite each other. And Sapphire did arrive quite late in the day as an extra character. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So there was that, but then I also just got so drawn into, and I can't go too far into this without spoilers, but I got so drawn into Owen's position while this was happening. What was happening to Owen was so, I was so concerned with him and also fascinated because, I can't say anything. It's really frustrating. But anyway, I know what you mean. So yeah, and also we've got Kate as well, who's at home, and the police are buzzing all around their street, and she knows they found something, and she knows there's something afoot out there on the street, but she's also starting to feel there's something afoot inside her own home. So that was something I really needed to focus on as well. And I don't really do detectives, which is somebody said to me the other day that I always do slightly rubbish detectives, and it's almost deliberate. No, but deliberately, because I need them to just not be solving the crime. I need somebody else to be doing all the interesting stuff, because if I was doing it all through the actual detective, then I'd have to be an expert in police procedure, and I'm not. So I either don't mention them at all, or they come in right at the end, or they're just there and they're just not really doing their jobs very well. That's the only thing I can do.
I love it. But I mean, I think there are so many of us who are such fans of what you write so brilliantly, which, I mean, I was like, I'm such a, I don't know, perfectionist when it comes to how do we categorize a book? And I would call this kind of a domestic suspense novel, and you write such brilliant domestic suspense stories. And do you have any theories as to why it seems like so many of us are so hooked on domestic thrillers?
I don't know. I got asked this a bit because there was this whole groundswell at the beginning of lockdown, wasn't there, where all the bestsellers were domestic thrillers.
Yeah.
And at the time, so I was asked this quite a lot at the time, and I thought it maybe had some sort of alignment with people enjoying conspiracy theories at times like this as well, because it's with a conspiracy theory, if you believe that there are people at the top who are controlling all of this and everything's happening for a reason, and even if it's, you know, evil, the fact of the matter is this isn't just chaos, this isn't just happening. The world isn't full of leaders and governance who genuinely don't know what they're doing or how to deal with this. They would rather believe that it's being stage managed somewhere. I guess it's the same thing for people who have faith as well. It just gets rid of that feeling of chaos, that it's out, that the world is out of control. And I think there's something like that about reading a thriller, because in a thriller, everything that happens will, as you get closer towards the end of the book, will start to make sense. It just makes sense of everything. So then you can look back at the thing that didn't seem to mean anything in chapter 3, and you go, oh, so that's what that was in chapter 3, and that's why she said that to him. And I think there is that sense of just the control that is involved in writing a decent thriller or suspense novel. Just that everything is there for a reason and everything means something.
And moving from that chaos to the order of here's the solution to you know, the mystery. Exactly.
And everybody knew what they were doing, and things weren't just happening willy-nilly. So that was a theory that I came up with. I don't know.
It's a great theory.
Also just because they're really good and you can lose yourself in them and just sort of
and I think that's been for me. Definitely. And now I know that we're like sort of running out of time here. And before we wrap up, I have to ask you to share a little bit about your writing process, because I know you've mentioned that these stories, like I said, they're pretty intuitive for you. The idea comes to you. I mean, how do you approach, once you have that kernel of an idea, how do you approach actually writing the story?
I try not to overthink it. See, before, when I was a younger writer, I'd say I would start writing a book and I'd be really underprepared and I hadn't done any research and I hadn't made any notes and I was a bad writer. But now I actually realise that that's the best way for me to come to a book, is not to have overthought it, not to have got too far down the road. So is to have definitely one character, possibly even two. Knowing that a third one will probably pitch up at some point. I'll suddenly realise that somebody else needs to be brought into the story. And then I just start typing. I really do. And I don't overthink the first chapter at all, because I think that's a mistake a lot of writers make, particularly debut, amateur writers who are starting to write for the first time, is thinking that the first chapter needs to be perfect. And it really doesn't. It just needs to be your first chapter. You need to start somewhere. So I try and get that down as quickly as I can, and then just see what happens. I mean, it sounds unprofessional, but it genuinely, for me, I now realise 18 books into my career I'm not the only writer who writes this way, which is also very reassuring. But this is how I write the books that I write, is by not knowing too much before I start writing and not having any preconceived ideas about what I want to do with the book or where it's going to go. Just having a sense of place, a sense of seasons, a sense of the kind of tone of the thing. So with Invisible Girl, I knew I wanted it to be winter. I knew I wanted it to be chilly and cold and shadowy and dark and all of those things, and then just see what happens. Just put things on the page and follow them, and see where they take you.
I think it's so incredible to hear from people who have such, like, I don't know, it's just such an amazing talent for storytelling, that you can have an idea and follow it through. And this book is incredible, and it's a complicated story, but like you weave it all together so masterfully. And I just think it's incredible to hear what an intuitive process it is for you. It's amazing.
Thank you very much. I enjoy it. It's fun.
But, well, your books are super fun to read, so I feel like the fun you must have writing them comes through.
Yeah, hopefully it's not too much work. Well, and that's what's really interesting too, back to the process, is that, so you don't know the ending when
Not at all. No, so it's quite about a third of the way into it is when Sapphire disappears. And I visualized her outside Rowan's house at midnight on Valentine's night, and then she's gone. But I didn't know, I had no idea what had happened to her. None. This is what I say. I write something down, and that can be like some dreary Wednesday afternoon, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I've only got half an hour left to write, and I've only written 800 words. I need to write another 200 words, otherwise I'm going to feel bad about myself. And something appears on the page, and for whatever reason, it was Sapphire going missing from outside Rowan's house. But then I've committed to that. I've written it down. I'm not going to go back and change it 5 minutes later because I don't know where she is. I have to work out where she is. I have to work out what happened to her myself. So it's kind of, yeah, it's.
So you allow yourself to go down those roads instead of having like a fixed, this is what the end is, I've got to get to that end. You let yourself kind of weave wherever these characters take you.
Absolutely correct. Or not just the characters, but whatever words I put on the page, which is what they are fundamentally. I've typed some words on the page and they suggest something, and I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find out by following the trail, really. Right. And not thinking that I can just keep going back and changing things to make my life easier, or because I've had a better idea or whatever. Yeah. It's a stubbornness.
I love the idea of like, I have 200 more. It's kind of like being on the treadmill. I need 5 more minutes. I need 200 more words.
That is what it feels like. It's very rare when I'm writing that I lose track of the fact that I'm writing. I generally feel very much like I am writing. Like my fingers are on the keyboard and I'm typing in words that are appearing on the screen. And it very rarely do I get into the state where I think, oh, I just wrote like a whole paragraph and I don't even remember doing it. Most of the time I feel every last word.
Breathing heavy on that treadmill.
Exactly.
Speaking of Sapphire, okay, that's a really, and especially the way that you wrote, you spell her name. Do names come easily to you, or is that something that is hard for you to? Yeah,
they generally do come easy to me. I have a thing where I try to use one-syllable surnames because, number one, it's easier to type. When you're constantly having to type someone's name, it's really nice if they've only got a one-syllable surname. Number two, I think it sounds really cool. There's just something cool about a one-syllable surname. But number three, it just limits the number of names that I could possibly. Every time I start a book, I Google one-syllable surnames and I go through a list of one-syllable surnames until I find the one. So that's how I found Pick for Owen, and Fours as well. I found Fours on that list. But the Sapphire Maddox, just don't know where that came from.
Do you have a master list so that you don't reuse names? Do you have a master list somewhere?
I'm hoping that I haven't. Yeah, I'm hoping that I still do remember the names that I've already used, but I probably am getting to the point where I should be writing them down just to make sure.
Because you don't really write sequels and you don't really go back to characters, right?
No, although I am going to be writing a sequel to The Family Upstairs. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so exciting. Oh my gosh.
Yes. It will be a standalone and it will only have one original perspective. Henry will be the only point of view from the first book. The other 2 points of view will be different characters. So it'll be quite fresh and different, but it will follow up the story. What happens next? Yeah.
That is so exciting. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Henry's an amazing character.
Yes. There you go.
Is that the one that's coming next? Is that what you're working on next? Because Nazine has a great question, kind of about how the writing was going through this time. So was that the book that you were writing during the shutdown?
What, the sequel?
Right.
No, I haven't started writing it yet.
Okay.
No, I started writing a book earlier this year and had 3,000 words written of it when we went into lockdown and all the schools shut. So 3,000 words is not a lot of words. So I hadn't really got going with it when lockdown started. And like pretty much every writer I know, I just couldn't write for the first few weeks. I don't think I knew one writer who managed to write during those first few weeks. Number one, because our kids were suddenly in the house, which is unhelpful. But number two, it just felt just felt strange. It just felt, how can I write about something that I was writing about before this cataclysmic thing happened and changed everything? But yeah, so then I finally pulled myself together and got back to it, and now I'm about 2/3 of the way into it. So that will be coming out this time next year, and it's called The Night She Disappeared. So another disappearing girl, the night she disappeared.
I love it. I
love
cannot wait to read it.
Disappear.
But we usually have a strong character in that, though. So that's kind of a, you know, even though they disappear, something happens. They're kind of that strong.
Yes, this will be my 3rd disappearing girl novel, but I can assure you it will be as different as Invisible Girl and Then She Was Gone were different to each other. This will be as different to them. So yeah. Yeah, what was the
catalyst that sparked that one?
This was not a person. This is not going to make for such interesting conversations when I'm promoting this book. I was doing a book event last November with 2 other writers who I'm very good friends with as well. This was, remember, real life book event, and we were in the same room. And somebody asked one of the writers I was with a question about her first novel. And she was talking about the genesis of her first novel. And it was because of a story her husband had told her about when he was at boarding school. And she just said that. She said, a story my husband told me about when he was at boarding school. And I suddenly thought, I need to write a book about a boarding school. I need to write a book about a boarding school. And this is it. It's going to be a boarding school book.
My gosh. Amazing. I love boarding school books. So this is very, very exciting.
Hasn't quite turned into as much of a boarding school book as I thought it was going to be, because of course I always split my stories up, so I never write about just one thing. But one chunk of the story is set in a boarding school in a village, but there's lots of other things going on in this village as well. So right. Yeah, so that was
because even though you have a place, it's like your books are very character driven versus place driven. You know, your places aren't necessarily a character in your books. You know, I mean, sometimes they are like a house I grew up in a little bit, but yeah. I would only have time for a couple more little things here. I have to ask this because it was one of those things that was noodling in my brain because I go back to stuff. There was a part where it was a Sapphire that puts her sheets down really tight and then just like, is it because she's claustrophobic and they just like get all wrapped around her? Okay. Because I was trying to go back and find it because it was noodling in my head. It's like, okay, we're talking about sheets again. And I was like, somebody else had some sheets. So thank you for clearing that up. And the other quick thing is people, because your books are so compelling and page turning, people read them very quickly. So and then we have to wait another year for another one.
Can I just quickly on that note? Sorry, I will let you finish, but if people can't wait a year, and this only applies to America because this book already came out in the UK about 12 years ago, but one of my unpublished books is coming out for the first time in America in January. And it's a good one, actually. It's a good one. So that's a nice little thing. You can go and buy, it's called The Truth About Melody Brown. And it comes out in January in America for the first time ever. Sorry. Carry on.
Amazing news.
Amazing news. And so that was a great segue to that because I was going to ask you, it's like we either have to wait a year for you, but like the January, so let's go out and do that. But then anybody else that's got something, are you reading anything or can you recommend anything that anybody, or Abby, you too, if somebody's got something that's a good recommend? How about you, Lisa?
I read the new Ruth Ware, which I think is already out there. It came out last month, One by One. Amazing, as always. Love Ruth Ware. And then, is it to hand? No, I don't have it to hand. I also read an ARC of an American book called The Push by Ashley Audrain, which comes out in January as well.
Writing that down.
Yeah, The Push. And it's a kind, I guess you call it a thriller suspense, a domestic suspense as well, it's a bit, we need to talk about Kevin. It's about a woman who gives birth to an adorable baby girl, and then the baby girl turns out to be quite not what she was expecting.
Ooh, yeah, because what we need to talk about Kevin, that was a tough book. Woo.
Yeah, no, this is a tough book as well, but it's much easier to read. It's not as dense as when you talk about Kevin. Brilliant.
Yeah.
How about you, Abby? You got anything you'd like to recommend to people besides this book?
Definitely. Well, yeah, I mean, this one, amazing. And I am also on a Catherine Ryan Howard kick right now, who's an Irish suspense writer. And I'm reading her book, The Liar's Girl, which is a kind of serial killer story set in Dublin about a young woman who discovered that the young man she was in love with was the serial killer who had murdered her best friend. And it's like fast forward 10 years and this woman has fled Ireland to, try to restart her life somewhere else, but she gets called back because it looks like there's a copycat killer at work in Dublin. It's really, really good.
Okay, wait a minute. What's the title of it?
The Liar's Girl by Catherine Ryan Howard.
Wait, what period is it set in?
It's present day.
Okay.
Well, I guess I should say it was written a few years ago now, but
Okay. Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
It is so good. She's like an author who I just sort of stumbled upon this year, and I've been trying to get caught up on her backlist during lockdown. It's been so good. Oh my gosh, Jessica, I'm so hooked on Catherine too. We love her. She's great.
Okay, well, we are out of time. Abby, if people want to follow you, because I'm going to be putting this on YouTube and on Facebook as well, what's the best way for people to follow you?
Oh, thank you. You guys can find me on Instagram at Crime by the Book and crimebythebook.com.
Excellent. And then, Lisa, you have a website, I'm assuming?
LisaJewell.com, LisaJewellBooks.com, LisaJewellBooks.com. Yes,
okay.
And I'm Lisa Jewell UK on Twitter and Instagram.
Perfect. And then Warwick's, we're hosting as many virtual events as we want to bring lots of content and lift up lots of authors' voices. So look at our website. We've got lots of great things happening. We're already booking stuff into the new year. I cannot thank you both enough for joining us today. Lisa, it was a true pleasure being able to host you. And I promise
it's been so lovely being here. Really, really, really lovely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for letting me get involved. This was a blast and great to see you, Lisa.
How lovely to see you, Abby, and maybe next time it will be in the real world.
I hope so.
Yeah.
All right, I'm taking this off of the recording, so thanks everybody.
Bye everybody.
Everyone. Thank you.
Have a lovely weekend.